Personal questions in your medical interviews can be some of the hardest questions to answer, firstly because it's hard to seem genuine, and then secondly because it's even harder to set yourself apart from the competition. So in this video, I'll be sharing with you my framework for answering personal questions, as well as giving you a model answer to 3 of the most common questions myself. Hey everyone, if you're new here, I'm Emil and I'm a first year medical student studying at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. And as usual, I won't waste any time and I'll get on to the first part of this video, which will be about my framework for answering personal questions. The first part of my general strategy when answering personal questions is to just be honest. A lot of the questions that you might be asked in medical interviews can sort of ask you to frame yourself as someone who is completely perfect and as someone who's never made mistakes before. However, I highly encourage that whenever you're presented with a personal question, that you acknowledge the fact that you have faced difficult periods in your life, or you have done certain things that maybe weren't ideal at the time. By adding these things, I think it adds a lot of depth to your answer because it doesn't seem like you're just pretending to be perfect the whole way through. You actually started somewhere and you've improved from that place you were at before. The second part of my general strategy is showing and not telling. The best way to show your personal qualities is definitely through an example. It's one thing to tell your interviewer that you're really caring or thoughtful, but then it's another thing entirely to actually show them that through an example where you helped some person in a scenario where they were in trouble, or where you volunteered at a charity to help people in need. Having really relevant examples to bring up in your interviews is one of the best things that you can do to actually set yourself apart from other candidates. And to make sure that you actually have examples to talk about, think about the most common personal questions that you might be asked about stress or failure or working in a team, and think of examples where you have done or experienced those things in the past. The third part of my strategy for answering personal questions is to actually just explore the examples that I give an interviewer. What this means is that when you give an interviewer an example, you don't want to be too vague in that you only tell them a few of the details about the scenario, and you also don't want to be too specific because then you'll end up wasting time and the interviewer might get lost in all the details that you bring up. As a result, you want to be fairly concise and find a balance between those two ends and explain to the interviewer what the issue was in the scenario that you brought up. For example, you might have been feeling stressed due to your exams and what actually happened as a result of that. The final part of my general strategy for answering personal questions is probably the most important, and this is about what you actually learnt from the example that you bring up. It's one thing entirely to just tell your examiner an example, but then it's another thing to explain to them exactly what you learnt from the experience that you had. This step, in my opinion, is the most important because if you don't actually explain what you learnt from the situation that happened, the examiner might actually end up thinking that in the future you'll make the same mistakes again and you'll still struggle with the scenarios that you're presented with. As always, I think it's best to illustrate this strategy through examples, so what I'll be doing is answering some of the most common personal questions that you might be asked in your interview with a model answer from myself. As a quick disclaimer before I start though, I have to say that I'm a medical student and I am by no means an expert on any medical interview, so these answers will not necessarily be 100% perfect. The first of the questions that I'll be going over today is a classic, which is, why do you want to study medicine? When answering this question, I think I'll take the approach of being as honest as possible. I won't want to make anything up because then I'm way more likely to make mistakes while I'm speaking or slip up and not seem genuine. Then secondly, what I'll do is I'll try to give a few examples of things that I have done in the past that have influenced my decision to do medicine. Considering those things, my answer to this question would go something like this. The reason as to why I wanted to study medicine is actually a fairly interesting one to me because when I was very young, I did have quite a strong familial influence into doing medicine. My family was very keen on me doing medicine. I had a dad who was also a doctor, but as I sort of got older, I realized that I wasn't really sure as to whether I wanted to do medicine or not, or whether I wanted to do it just because of the familial influence that my parents and my family had given me. So as a result, I really wanted to make sure that if I did medicine, I wanted to do it for the right reasons. So as a result, I actually started to come across this decision and really solidify my decision to do medicine from a few experiences that I had. The first of these experiences was actually volunteering at a hospital in rural Sri Lanka, and I had the pleasure of visiting this hospital and following around the treating doctors and helping around with a lot of the patients, talking to the patients, and having this experience of just being engulfed in this healthcare setting. And from this experience, I realized that it was really inspiring how the doctors were able to have such a huge impact on patients' lives, and I realized that that was something that I really wanted to do myself. Then another experience that I had that ultimately helped me to make the decision to do medicine was my experience as a prefect or a school leadership officer in year 12. And from doing this, I realized that one, I really liked the leadership position that being a prefect offered me. It offered me the opportunity to make a lot of changes within my school and also to organize and run a lot of events that I was really passionate about. But then it also made me realize that I really enjoyed working in a team as well, because I had to help along with other prefects' activities that they had planned and also work along with the school captain and ultimately try to help other people as much as possible. So from those experiences, I really started to realize that these were all qualities that I had that I thought made me really fitting for a career in medicine, and that's what ultimately made me to choose to study medicine. So hopefully from that answer, you can really see how showing rather than telling is really important when coming up with an answer for a personal question, because rather than just telling the interviewer that I like helping people, I show them that I've worked in the past and I was inspired by the way doctors helped others. And rather than just saying that I really like working in teams, I show them that I worked in teams through being a prefect in year 12. Before moving on to my answer for the next two personal questions, if you've enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, and consider subscribing to my weekly email newsletter in the description box down below. So the next personal question that I'll be answering comes from scenario 30 of my free MMI book, which is, when have you felt stressed in the past and how did you deal with it? Now, when approaching this question, the first thing that I'll be thinking of is I'll be trying to find a relevant example of a time where I've actually felt stressed. So this doesn't necessarily have to be super unique. It could be the stress you were feeling before a UCAT exam, your music exam, a sports game, your year 12 exams, or even before giving a speech in public. What's important is the next thing I'll be thinking about, which is what I actually learned from the experience and how I'll phrase what I learned to the examiner. So as a result, my answer to this question would probably go something like this. I have certainly felt stressed at many times in the past, and each time I feel like I dealt with it slightly better, having learnt from the experience of the last time that I was feeling stressed. So the most recent time I felt stressed was probably before my year 12 exams, because I knew that these exams were really important for my future, and as a result, getting an ATAR or doing badly on these exams could possibly affect my ATAR and my chances of getting into a university or getting into medicine. So as a result, I was feeling really stressed before these exams, and the first thing I sort of did in this situation was I sort of tried to think of where this stress was actually coming from. When I realized that when thinking about my stress, I sort of realized that it was coming from my lack of preparation in certain areas for my exams, because I knew that I wanted to score really, really highly. So because I knew that I was feeling that stress in that way, what I did was I went to my teachers and I asked them to explain to me the topics that I was struggling with. I did some more practice exams on the areas that I was finding really difficult, and as a result, I started to build up this confidence for what I was going to do on my exam, and I started to feel a lot less stressed because I felt more prepared for my exams and more confident in my ability to do well. But even then, once I had done that, I knew that I'd still feel a little bit stressed just because these exams are so important and they're kind of such high pressure situations. So as a result, I still made sure while preparing for those exams, especially in the days and weeks leading up to them, that I maintained the hobbies that I found us really stress relieving. So for me, these are things like meditation, yoga, and playing violin, which is an instrument I really like to play, and also reading. And I found that all of these activities and participating in those things have really helped me to reduce the stress that I feel in certain situations. So as a result, those are the things that I do when I'm feeling stressed in the past. And what I've learned is that it's really important for me to, one, seek help from my friends and teachers, and then also to keep up with the hobbies and things that I enjoy that are really stress relieving activities. So from that, hopefully you can see that that last bit at the end where I tell the examiner what I learned is really important, because it highlights to them that when I'm feeling stressed in medical school, which will inevitably happen, that I will know what I have learnt and I will have the skills and abilities to actually deal with that stress when it arises. The final personal question that I'll be answering comes from scenario 13 from my free MMI book, which is: give an example of a time where you've had to work in a team-based environment. So in this question, much like the stressful situation question, I'll be trying to think of a few examples of times where I've had to work in a team. So these can be things like where you've had to work in a leadership group, where you've just been part of a sporting team or a music group, or even when you've been part of a debating team, for example. Once I've thought of a relevant example to talk about where I've actually worked in a team-based environment, then what I'll start to think about is what difficulties are present in team-based environments and how I sort of dealt with those issues when they arose in the situations that I was in. Again, something that's really important to bring up is what you actually learned from working in a team-based environment and what skills you have as a result of working in a team-based environment. So knowing that, this is how I would answer this question. I have certainly had to work in a team-based environment in many times in the past, and the first example that really comes to mind is when I had to work in a small debating team. So my debating team had four people in it, and we had to work very quickly under very strict time limits to answer debating prompts and to try and give a winning case to actually win the debate at the end of the day. So as a result, when we were given debate topics, we usually had 1 hour to prepare our speeches, and each of us had to give a 6 to 7 minute speech at the end of that prep time against an opposition team that was also debating against us. So in this sort of team-based situation, I found that there were often many difficulties that came up as a result. Often my team members would start to argue about what arguments they thought were best, and as a result, in these situations, I really learned that it's really important to get all of the members of the team working together and cooperating. And I learned that it's much easier to get two members of the team to cooperate by sort of going to each of them one by one, talking to them about their argument and talking to the other person about their argument, and trying to find a compromise where one person can use one argument, or we could actually just present both arguments under the same case. As a result, I also found that in this team-based environment, I found that I learned how to take other people's instructions as well, because I realized that in a small team, it's really important that you're able to listen to the instructions that other people give you so that you're actually able to do the work necessary. So often in that debating team, I had to write paragraphs for people who were speaking before me so that they'd be able to speak about a certain topic that we thought that was really important to the arguments that we were making. But then I also realized that at times I had to take a leadership position and instruct my other team members to do certain things for me so that I was able to talk about the necessary arguments that we actually needed. So as a result of working in those team-based environments, I realized that I've become really good at both playing a team member role and also a team leader role, and that I've realized that it's really important to try and cooperate between all members of the team by getting everyone to hear their opinion and voice their opinions, and also to find some sort of compromise when working in a team-based situation. So from the insights that I've given in that example, hopefully the interviewer will be able to see that I understand the intricacies and difficulties of working in a team-based environment, and that in the future when I have to work in a team-based environment, either in medical school or as a doctor, that I will have the skills necessary to actually manage the difficulties that might come up in that environment. If you've enjoyed watching me answer these questions, do hit the subscribe button and make sure to watch this video where I share a resource that has 50 practice scenarios for you to use.